Welcome to Silent Book Club Author Chats, everyone. Hello, my name is Laura Gluhanic, co-founder of Silent Book Club, and joining me today is my co-founder Guinevere, as well as Leigh Stein, author of the book Self-Care. Welcome, Leigh. Thank you so much for being here. Super excited to kind of chat about the book and about your approach to self-care and to irony. Before we get into that, though, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your background and kind of, I know this isn't your first book, but like what got you into writing?
Oh boy, what got me into writing? I began as a poet. So I come from a poetry background. That was my first love. And then at some point in my early 20s, I decided to write a real book, which was my first novel, The Fallback Plan, that came out in 2012. So this is my fourth book. Right before this, I had a memoir published in 2016. And a lot of what inspired me to write Self-Care was running a private Facebook group of 40,000 women writers called Binders. I started a conference based on this Facebook group called BinderCon. There's a conference scene in the novel. I know a lot of people tonight have probably read the book, but some people probably have not. But my experience running this online community of women was the best of times and the worst of times. I was really proud of the conference organizing, but the Facebook group became really toxic, and ultimately I had to resign in 2017 because I was so burnt out. So Marin's where Marin begins the book as this kind of burnt out feminist organizer who's not making enough money. That basically comes from where I began in 2017 when I started writing the book.
Oh man, that's so funny. And one of the questions I was going to ask was, do any of the characters reflect you? And it sounds like Marin primarily. Were there any others that, either traits or kind of situations that reflect you in your life?
Well, the book is told in alternating first person between three main characters: Marin, who's the COO of the company; Devin, who's the CEO and kind of the beautiful blonde, thin Gwyneth Paltrow-esque face of the company; and then Khadijah, who is a Black millennial and their star hire, and she's kind of tokenized to represent all diversity at the company. So there's a little bit of me in all those characters. Khadijah is extremely online. She's grown up on the internet. She's been writing personal essays since she was a blogger in college. That is very familiar to my experience. And Devin, part of the plot hinges on these allegations of sexual misconduct against the main funder of the company, a man named Evan. His name rhymes with Devin. It's kind of a joke in the book. But Devin's relationship with Evan and whether or not she sees herself as a victim or not, that also comes from my experience promoting a memoir, which was about an abusive relationship, and feeling uncomfortable with the marketing of that and the labels that were kind of attached to me. And so that's where Devin comes from, even though I don't think people would read Devin and think of me as the face.
I could barely follow all of the terms that she used at any given time. So that's probably a good thing. I will say, so like, I love this book, Self-Care. It's hilarious. I love that it's so funny, and it's to me it's like a real reflection of culture and society, for better or worse. But I also I think it's not like, I still read it I think at a pool when I was staycationing here in Denver, which is kind of hilarious. And so I think it's still super accessible, but I will say, so it covers a lot. It's reflective of, startup and VC culture. It's performative allyship, cancel culture, influencers, wellness. And it sounds like this is really reflective of your life, but how did you get this all into one piece?
Yeah. So some of the interviews I've done on podcasts, one person said to me, I don't think it's a satire. He was like, I know these people in your book, this is just realism, which is a little scary to me because I felt like I was amplifying and exaggerating in order to make it a satire. But I think what you're saying, Laura, is I think there are really three layers of satire, and different readers are finding different layers for themselves. So the first most obvious layer is goop. So it's this kind of elite lifestyle brand that sells you a $695 dress so your self-tanner doesn't get on your clothes. That everyone recognizes, that everyone knows, influencers on Instagram selling us products. So that's the top level of the satire. Then underneath that, I think I'm satirizing girl boss feminism, which is often a white millennial. Her Instagram or her Twitter profile says that she's a feminist, but maybe behind the scenes, her company isn't as feminist as her personal brand. And I think we're seeing a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of girl bosses fall this summer, like Audrey Gelman at The Wing. There's some allegations now coming out about Glossier. To me, those aren't as bad as what we've seen from Away or from Outdoor Voices, but that's up for discussion. But then the third layer is that I'm satirizing the kind of extremes of far left woke internet culture and this kind of really extreme orthodoxy that you have to believe a certain thing or else you're out of the group, and the way mobs can form around ideas and there's no room for dissent. So that's also something that I'm critical of. And I've seen this kind of far left woke culture also weaponize victimhood, that if you're the biggest victim of all, you can win the argument or the disagreement. And that disturbs me. So that's like the deepest layer that I'm not sure every reader is picking up by the pool, but people who are online as much as I am, I think recognize that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And so you mentioned some of these girl bosses, and I want to bring in a question from one of the members of our group, Sarah, who's in LA. And she says, your book is so spot on the way it depicts startup culture, particularly female-led startups. Obviously, it reminded me a lot of brands like The Wing, Glossier, Ritual. Ritual is your brand.
But so there's a Ritual with a T that's a real vitamin brand.
Oh, that's what she mentioned. Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's so much has happened in those spaces in a short time since you wrote the book. Like, yeah. How do you feel seeing these, sort of feminist, or you could call faux feminist, leaders of these companies getting canceled? Do you have a relationship with any of them? Do you have any personal contact?
I don't. So I wrote the book by just eavesdropping online. So I just followed a lot of people and kind of imitated their brand and their speech. That's how I wrote the book. I did write an article for Medium that went viral this summer about girl bosses, but I'm not really a journalist. I'm a fiction writer, I'm a poet, I'm an essayist, but I'm not really a journalist. So it wasn't a reported piece like Amanda Hess did amazing reporting for The Times on The Wing. I'm not that kind of a writer. But I will say something that's like really disturbing is, when my memoir came out in 2016, to this day, I'll get DMs from women that read my memoir about bad relationships, and they'll say, it happened to me too. So I was used to getting those messages. I didn't realize I would get those messages about this book, Self-Care. So I'm getting DMs from women that said, I worked for a feminist boss like this. I worked for a girl boss. Who do I tell my story to? So they're victims. I mean, there are people out there that are victims of this kind of toxic, capitalist feminism. And when I say that, I mean, it's a kind of two-facedness, right? Like if you're a true feminist, put feminist practices in place in your office, right? Don't just put it on your branding or your packaging for your products. So that's the thing that really bums me out. I heard from one reader who was pregnant at work and had to hide it because there was no HR department. And so she told me, if you work for a startup, you better learn labor laws, because, and this was something that came up in my research for the novel, is that a lot of startups don't have HR departments right away. It's seen as a luxury for later. We're all friends here. We're just making money, right? Like we don't need HR.
Right. Well, and certainly no written policies for anything, right? And it's like, you think you can be agile, and in some ways you can, but like, sort of like move fast and break things. It's not just you're breaking things. It's like, who are you breaking as well?
Who are you breaking? Whew.
Yeah. Got real deep. So you mentioned the different characters and kind of researching their voices, and you utilize multiple voices, perspectives in addition to different formats. So like articles, chats. Can you share more, like why you chose that approach, particularly I think with the 3 characters?
My ambition was to create a book that feels like what it's like to be online. So as a millennial, there's such blurry boundaries between my work life and my personal life. Even though I work from home and I try to do my work upstairs in a physical space and I try to go downstairs and have my personal life, I'm checking my work email without even thinking that I'm doing it. I delete apps off my phone, but I'm addicted to them and I add them back on. So this kind of, you know, there's like a scene with Devin where she like takes a shower and then she posts something on Instagram and then she thinks of something to post into Slack. And then there's a comment in Slack about the thing she posted to Instagram, just these blurred boundaries. That's what I was trying to create. And like, there's, like one of my favorite parts of my own book is the branded content post of Marin investigated by the Secret Service. That's like I think I call it lunar milk, but it's like moon juice. Yes. But my editor was like, I think we should cut this. I don't think you need this. And I was like, it's my darling. Just this kind of, I just see this all the time, this kind of advertorial. I mean, you even see it in the New York Times where it's written as a piece of content, but really it's a paid advertisement disguised as content.
I appreciate that yours, at least it was fairly obvious, you know, the sort of like line, because sometimes, yeah, it's like at the footer, it's like totally out of use. So you have no idea what you're reading is not based in any sort of, you know, let's say journalistic integrity. So.
And I think this happened with the vitamin. I don't know if it was Ritual or it's another vitamin company, but some women's media website did a product review that was really sponsored by them. And then they used that in their advertising as if this company had endorsed their product that they had paid for. And I complained about this to a friend. She was like, that's just how it's done. Like that's how this works now.
Yeah. Oh man, that's wild. Kind of continuing in the discussing the book specifically, we'll get a bit more into sort of writing approach and some other questions, but and we did talk about this a little bit earlier, but like I love the book's ending. Once again, I thought this was like reflective of what I've observed happening, particularly in startups or in, you know, companies. And I want to give things away to people who haven't read it yet, but you know, I would love to hear more because it sounds like reactions haven't been consistent, which I think is good, but like, can you share more about how people have reacted to how the book resolves?
Yeah, so I think there's some ambiguity at the end. I don't really tell readers what to think or who to root for at the end. I kind of leave it in their laps. And I think this has upset some people on Goodreads. I think some readers they don't like being you know, they're saying, why didn't she tell me what to think at the end? Why wasn't it more clear what I was supposed to think at the end? But I'm kind of leaving it up to the reader. And, you know, people have said things to me, I don't want to give it away, but people will say, you know, like this character was so conniving at the end. And I thought, wow, that wasn't my intention. You know, I tried to leave it ambiguous so that you have to kind of bring your own, perspective and who you're rooting for. And you might be hurt by the downfall of one character. Maybe you're rooting for another character at the end. But I was hoping it would be a book that's talked about in book clubs. I hope that people would argue about the ending. That was my fantasy when I wrote it.
I mean, I think you succeeded. I think what I like about it is I mean, I mentioned it, but it seems realistic and people are acting as individuals and not as, you know, caricatures. And I think, again, yeah, it seems so true. And I think there's so much of the book that is elevated rhetoric, you know, it kind of poking fun or whatever. And that just seemed really, really truthful to me. So I really liked it. And I'm glad that you made those choices.
One other thing I'll say about the ending is that a book club I did last week, we ended up talking a lot about class. And so some readers said, you know, the end of the book really shows that really there's a class hierarchy and certain people are going to win at the end of the day, right? It's not the underdog. It's the people that already have the power, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is super correct. Bringing in another question from one of our group members. So the theme is self-care, you know, Mega from Vancouver. This is a good question. How do we navigate between self-care and being a hermit, or self-love and being viewed as narcissistic or selfish? Like, how do you strike that balance?
With self-care, I often see the metaphor of the oxygen mask on an airplane, that you have to put yours on first before you can help other people. And this was a metaphor that was told to me constantly when I was running my feminist nonprofit. And I just thought, I don't have time. I don't have time for self-care. I have to work. And I didn't realize that my workaholism was a kind of addiction, that when I'm anxious or under stress, I just work harder. I think that's going to fix it. And so I really had to learn actual self-care since I resigned. And for me, what's been helpful for me is like remembering that I have a body, like stopping to be like, what does my body feel like? Because I'm so in my head that I can go all day without ever thinking of my physical form. But I think the truth is that self-care doesn't have to cost anything. You know, drinking water doesn't cost anything usually. You know, getting enough sleep. These are all things you can do that, you know, makes you feel better, but companies know that we feel like shit. And so they would like to sell us things to fix us. And so this has been going on for a long time, right? That women are broken unless we buy certain things, or we lose 10 pounds, or we go here, we go there. So wellness, to me, it's just like a rebrand of the diet industry, but it's called wellness now. But when we really think about true self-care, I think about things that are free and that, you know, your body needs if you listen to your body.
Wow. That makes me feel like a bad person, because my next question was going to be, what are your, like, do you have products that you like? You're like, I like water. But yeah, no, I think there's still like the indulgence side, right? And so I guess that's maybe a better question. Like, what do you indulge in?
What do I indulge in? That's a hard question, actually. I was just thinking about that today. It's like, it's very hard for me to think of things I do, not because I should do them. I have a very like stoic, school marmy voice in my head that says, you know, I should do this, and I should move, and I should go for a walk, and I should, you know. So it's hard for me to find pleasurable activities. I guess, watching reality TV shows, like really bad, like Celebrity Motorhome, the TV show, really bad. I guess that's pleasurable. There's no other reason that I watch that.
But yeah, it's not necessarily bad per se. I'm going to suggest Numino's, the chocolate with peanut butter ones. Those are a great indulgence. Guinevere, did you want to bring in a question from someone here today?
Yeah, so Ella has a question about your previous book. What has it been like promoting a satirical novel like Self-Care compared to promoting a memoir of a troubled relationship like Land of Enchantment? The two books are so different. So how has your experience of publishing those been different?
I'm really glad you asked that, and I appreciate you coming, Ella. It's really good to see you. I'm meeting Ella for the first time on Zoom. We're internet friends, though. It's a really good question, because I really did notice a difference. I felt it was uncomfortable promoting my memoir, because I didn't want my brand to be survivor of abusive relationship. Like, I didn't want that's what people thought of when they thought of me. I wanted to be a writer, and I thought I'd written a book that was nuanced and explored why I was so drawn to this person that was bad for me, and why did I keep going back to him. So I really hated the labeling, and it just felt like, you know, messaging people and saying, can I send you this sad book? It's like, it didn't feel great. But then with this book, being able to message people and say, can I send you this book? I think it'll make you laugh. And especially during the pandemic, I think this was one of your questions too, Laura, like that I had a book coming out in the pandemic, which is not ideal, but people would say, oh my God, I need to laugh. Please send it to me. So it felt like an easier sell. And it also felt more comfortable, because I could say it's a novel, you know, even though there's parts of me in the characters. Because it was a satire, it was like I was wearing a protective cape, and I could say what I really thought without being worried that, you know, people were just going to assume that it was my opinions, as if I wrote an opinion column. I'm much more comfortable writing fiction and writing poetry than I am writing op-eds, though I have written a couple. It just feels better to me.
So yeah, you get a little more distance. Speaking of your writing, Maria from Bozeman asked, this is such a good question, how much of your writing do you end up throwing away? So how does the Truby book you mentioned on Brad's podcast treat pre-writing or thinking about your characters off the page? I'm going to kind of skip ahead. Is there a way, in short, you've become efficient at writing, a way to avoid so much mess?
So I think there are two kinds of writers, and I almost feel it's just like you're born one way or the other. There are people that write a lot, and then they find the book within that. And I've never been that kind of writer. I don't know how to write a shitty first draft using the Anne Lamott idea, where you just write, and that's draft one, then you do it all again. Because I come from a poetry background and I'm very detail oriented. I'm working on a very small level. A good day of writing my novel for me is like 250 words. And I have time. Like, this isn't like me squeezing it in. I don't have kids. This is like, if I have a solid chunk of time and I do a really good writing day, I get 250 words. But I will say Maria references this guy, John Truby. I read his book, Anatomy of Story, and it really changed how I approach plot. And I did more thinking for this book than I've ever done. I think with previous books, I think as I write, I'm like, well, I don't know what happens in this chapter. Let's go find out. But with Truby, I really outlined and thought through what I was doing with my story. So with the character of Marin, I thought, how far can I make her go in the name of doing the right thing? Marin's telling herself the whole time, I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to help the company. I'm going to help Devin. I know what I'm doing. But she keeps making immoral decisions. So I had a certain framework in my head in a way that I haven't had for any previous book.
That's really fascinating. And I appreciate that because we've had a couple authors who are basically like, I just let it unfold. And everyone who listened, I mean, I think the majority of people who listen are like, what? How does that work?
But you can, I think now that I know his method, I mean, now I start seeing the world that way, right? Like I watch a TV show and I'm like, oh, that's the Truby method. Like I can see it. I can see the architecture of plot everywhere I look now. But you can see it too when you read a novel and you can tell the writer figured it out as they went. Because you get to the end and you're like, how did we get over here from there? But you want your end, I mean, in my opinion, you want your ending to feel both inevitable for the reader and surprising. That it's been building, that I've put I've like making a clock and I put all the pieces in throughout the book and then it explodes at the end. I guess that's a bomb. That's not a clock, that's a bomb. Mixed metaphor.
We understood. I guess kind of now we're talking about writing and writers. And so what authors have influenced your writing?
With this book in particular, I loved Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I find her to be a very like brazen, inappropriate writer in a way that's like very liberating for me to read. I feel like I'm drawn to books where I'm like, especially by women, where I'm like, I didn't know you could do that. You can do that. Jillian by Hallie Butler is another book that did that for me. It's so mean and dark, and it's like women saying things to each other where they're thinking one thing and they're saying something completely different to be nice. That's also a book I loved. I read American Psycho when I was writing this for the first time. I thought it was hilarious and inappropriate. I guess I'm drawn to inappropriate things. And I talked to Ella about this online. Winners Take All, which is a nonfiction book by Anand Giridharadas, about kind of these market-friendly, let's change the world foundations, where it's like people who've already made a lot of money use that money instead of paying taxes with it. They start foundations. And there's a whole section on thought leaders versus critics. So a thought leader has like an idea that they can talk about in the TED Talk that's very digestible, that you're like, yeah, I could stand like Superwoman and then I'll get a raise. That I will do that tomorrow. Versus critics that are like, actually, there's like this big systemic problem. We're not going to be able to solve it tomorrow with you in the boardroom, but like, let's spend 10 years researching this. That's not sexy.
Yeah. Well, I feel like as many times as not, the thought leaders, whatever they said is like countered with additional research, like subsequently, where it's like, oh no, that was actually just your opinion. That was not in fact.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we were talking about, just now, but then do you have any favorite authors from when you were growing up?
I loved Francesca Lia Block. I don't know if anyone here loves her. Francesca Lia Block, she wrote these YA books about like LA teenagers that were like witches and fairies. It wasn't fantasy though. It was like they were teenagers, but they wore cool clothes and there was a lot of like magic. And the first internet community I was ever a member of was a Francesca Lia Block fan club listserv. And it's like, thanks to this listserv, I discovered Tori Amos. I discovered Ani DeFranco. I got my first mix CD. Someone mailed me a mix CD. I was like, what is this? How do you make this? So that really opened my eyes. That
early internet was so good.
It's so good.
Yeah. I met a college friend from the Dave Matthews Band fan group on AOL, which is embarrassing, but it was 1998. So I don't know.
That's great.
Yeah. I'd love to like shift a little bit and talk more about your experience in publishing, and particularly like thinking about BinderCon and your Binders group. And now today, obviously there's kind of been another, you know, reckoning in publishing. And do you like, have you seen any shifts or changes since 2014 when you were sort of starting this activism, and what's going on today?
When we were doing BinderCon, we were doing 2 conferences a year, one in New York City, which was more media and book publishing focused, and one in LA, which was for film and TV. And I don't know that I was fully aware of like demographics even in book publishing at the time, maybe vaguely, but now it's very clear to me, and the stats back this up, book publishing is predominantly white women. There are a lot of women in book publishing. It's not male dominated. It's dominated by women. LA is so much worse. Like the industry for women to write and make TV and film, I would say documentary film is the exception. There's a lot of women in documentary film, but it's so much worse than it is in New York City for book publishing. So I don't see hurdles for women in New York City in these particular industries the way I do in LA. But of course we have seen, especially this summer, a big racial reckoning in book publishing. Because many racial minorities and also LGBTQIA writers have felt excluded by the gatekeepers in publishing. And I think I've seen positive changes in terms of people getting book deals, people getting book club recognition. We're seeing a lot of writers of color on the bestseller list right now. I just did an event with Raven Leilani. Her debut novel is like the talk of the town. It's sensational. So I do see some positive progress that I think is worth celebrating.
That's good. Yeah. Thinking about the recent books you read, this is kind of going back and forth now, but like, what's the last 5-star book you read? Oh no.
Raven's book really is as good as you're like in a car with her and then suddenly she makes a left turn, like the sentence ends in a completely different place than where it began.
Can you say that once more? Because I think it froze for me and I'm not sure if anyone else.
Yeah, it's Luster.
Okay.
By Raven Leilani, and it debuted on the list. It just came out, I think, probably 2 weeks ago from FSG. That was a sensational book.
Amazing.
And you'll read it in a gulp. You'll just sit down and you'll just like read it in a day.
Maybe find another pool.
Find a pool
to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I have a question, as you're talking about, what changes have you seen in publishing, I'm also curious about whether or not you have seen any changes in sort of in influencer culture, particularly sort of with the pandemic over the last few months. How has that online culture that is, so, sponsored and branded and based around like this kind of performance tourism when you can't travel,
what is performance tourism?
Oh, like when you go and you travel and you're just taking photos of yourself in front of all of these beautiful, backgrounds and things. I've often wondered, what are all of those people, like that one where the girl, it was this girl who basically her boyfriend follows her around and she takes a photo of herself, holding her hand or his hand, or there's something about the two of them. But yeah, I'm curious, have you seen a shift in, in this whole kind of realm?
Yeah, it's been kind of fascinating to watch the kind of reckoning of white female influencers in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protests, because suddenly we saw all these statements all of a sudden. I personally am very skeptical of woke capitalism, by which I mean companies issuing statements of solidarity. They ring very hollow to me, like Netflix and Amazon issuing a statement about how they stand with Black people and they don't pay taxes to the federal government. I would rather have their money. I would rather have their taxes. I don't understand why lipstick is marketed to me on Instagram to support LGBTQ people. How does the lipstick support them? So I'm very skeptical of brands using social justice movements as another way to sell products to millennials who love being ethical consumers. I've also thought it's funny recently, like all the millennials being like, let's buy stamps, like let's go shopping, like let's get stamp shirts. That's how we'll save the post office. We need so much, the post office needs so much more than our shopping. So is it important for white people to become more aware of systemic injustices in our country? Totally. I just question what these statements are, how much of it is performance, right? And how much of it is like true reckoning? How much of it is going to lead to action and meaningful change? Is it a trend? I think we don't know yet. But I think, you know, I wrote my book in response to the Me Too movement and how feminism had become a trend. Feminism became trendy when, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of celebrities wouldn't call themselves feminists, right? Because that was associated with hairy armpits and you don't like men or whatever. Then suddenly it was trendy. So I worry, is, you know, anti-racism a trend? I hope it's not, right? But we have to see. It's too soon to make a judgment call on what this leads to.
So we had one woman from Joan from Alaska wrote in, was honestly some concern. She said, after reading your book and hearing you on Megan Dome's Unspeakable podcast, I wonder how you are withstanding the cancel culture. It seems well, but I wonder if your career is being impacted negatively. And if so, how we, the reading public, might help you. We definitely need your voice in the world.
Well, that's very sweet. And all the way from Alaska. Hi, Joan. I don't want to go into too many details, but I will say there was a internet controversy within 48 hours of my book coming out. And I was in trouble for associating with the wrong person online. And there was a storm around this. It has since died down, which is why I don't want to really name names. But I do feel like a pressure to be silent more than I've ever felt before. I say less and less on Twitter because I'm a people pleaser and I like harmony. I'm a Libra. I'm not a provocateur. And I think some people on Twitter do really well and have huge followings because they poke the bear, right? And they want to be deliberately provocative. The most provocative I can be is that I wrote this novel. That was like as far as I was willing to go. So I don't want to be mired in controversy and drama online. And so I'm careful what I say more now than ever. And it's also, you know, that this book is doing well for me. This book is doing better than any of my previous books. And I don't want to jinx it, you know, like I want my baby to grow up. Now, Joan asked a good question. How can you support someone like me who feels this way? I recently joined Persuasion, which is this community started by Yasha Monk, who's an Atlantic writer and a sociologist and an author. And I've really enjoyed it. And it has Zoom happy hours and book clubs. We did a book club for my book last week. And I think for me, getting offline, so getting off Twitter and having a conversation that's more like this, where you can see my face and you can see my body language and my expressions, and you can hear my voice, or even on a podcast, I think you're getting nuance about who I am and what I believe in a way that you might not from something I tweet, if I tweet the wrong stupid thing. So I think I'm just in my life looking for more, it's hard during the pandemic too, when I can see my friends so infrequently. But I'm looking for a different kind of online community. I think that's what I'm searching for. I'm searching for a new kind of online community.
Well, it seems too that Twitter sort of shifted, and there's still communities on there, but it's like from a community to a platform, and it's a different relationship. And so, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you want it specifically, it's a community you're looking for. And I think most people versus I want an audience or a platform, which some want that.
Yeah, it's both things. And, I've made friends during the pandemic, and there's people I talk to on Twitter that have become friends. So I don't want to lose that. But I'm also like, do I feel worse or better after I go on Twitter? I usually feel worse. And I have to notice, again, it's like, how does my body feel? It's again, that kind of like awareness. Is this making me happy?
Yeah. Yeah. And your body's like, you need water, but also turn off the phone. Probably. That's what mine tells me.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. We are going to wrap up. And we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate you writing this book. It's so fantastic. Go ahead.
Well, thank you to everyone who came tonight.